land management. Covers various trades, professions, whatever, and they include surveying land, prospecting, mining and forestry. And these are some of the tools that will be used in those areas. So if we talk about surveying first, as far as Sheffield is concerned, James Chesterman were very early in the business of making measuring tools for measuring large tracts of land in places like Canada, America, Australia, when they were dividing land up. And this is the land chain, which is 22 yards long, and surveyors would have to pull it out to a full length, put in an arrow at the beginning and at the end, and then once they'd measured one, they'd take the chain forward and keep measuring to the length that was required, and actually make note of how long it was. A chain is 22 yards divided up into 100 links, which is each about 7 1/4 inches long. It's not quite, but close enough to 7 1/4 inches long. And they would measure the land in that manner. Another form of measuring that came after the land chain was the band chain, and the band chain is a derivative of, let me get this out, of a very thin steel strip in long lengths, and instead of the more cumbersome chain, which was very heavy to drag, this became used probably after about 1880. In actual fact, the first idea came from crinoline steel, and when the ladies' fashion of having dresses in crinoline went by, many people in Sheffield were left with tons and tons of this steel strip that they couldn't sell, and they were looking for other uses. And I am told, as well as making it into band chain like this, they also used it for wire fencing, and it's possible, I'm not quite sure, but it's quite possible that this is the start of making these wire fences instead of wood fences, because the stuff was so cheap they were trying to get rid of it. Another one of the measures that were made specially for measuring was in the mines, the gold mines of South Africa, and this tape was made for the Burns Rivers Company in Johannesburg, and it was for a simple tape measure, very plainly marked, for use down the gold mines. A very robust case made out of bakelite, which was impregnated with a cloth material, so if it got dropped or hit with anything it wouldn't break. Bakelite on its own is a very brittle material, but with the reinforcing, it became a very strong material, which is what they used at Chesterman's. They made their own cases, and at one time Chesterman's always bought in raw materials and made finished products, of course. So that says Chesterman, Sheffield, England, with its trademark. Graduated in feet, every 3 inches. So it's 3 inch, 6 inch, 9 inch, 12 inch, and so on, right throughout. So they're only inched through every 3 inch. Who would want to be anything else if you're digging a hole in a gold mine? And it keeps the price down. What we're also showing here, another new item, is a box containing cross staff head. And it's in two parts, and one, this has the vertical spindle that's attached to a tripod, and that's assembled in such a manner. And in use, this is fixed, and one judges by looking through these gaps in here, and through the gap opposite, in which there's a wire, one can line up in front on a given point. So from a point where one stood over to a point over there, you can move a staff round until you get it in line, and then you can do the same exactly at right angles to that. And so what you're then doing is you're creating a line exactly at right angles to one another, used in setting buildings out, quite sizable buildings or small site areas over could be a largish distance. It's not as expensive as a theodolite or similar instrument, but it does the job in many cases, and this would be a very valuable adjunct to a surveyor. Right, moving on from there, we started off with surveying, prospecting. Prospectors were in the large geologists, and this is a geologist's hammer. And in actual fact, if you're going out for long periods of time, you were coming across different materials, so this handle accommodated several heads. I'm not sure whether there are any other heads, but if we have any more, we can have a look and see if we've got any. Or you could have more than one head of the same pattern, so as it got blunt and you blunted your chisel end for cutting rock up, for breaking rock up, to look at the structure of it, you could quite easily slip another one on. It fits on a taper, so you just tap the handle on the end, and the head drops off and you can slip another one on. So that's part of the prospector's kit to look to. As a geologist, you would be wanting hammers of that sort in order to look at the specimen rock that's about. Whilst you're going through the bush, of course, you've got to clear the trees, and you would have axes of this pattern. So we've got the hand axe. For bigger trees, you would use either a larger felling axe of this pattern perhaps. This one is known as a tumber axe, and I think that's a Brazilian pattern axe. And that's something rather similar, certainly made for export. Stanley's Surveying Instruments, page 582. Slashing knife, billhook or axe. In new countries where site way has to be obtained for the survey through forests and jungles, one or more of the tools illustrated next is the most valuable as a part of a surveyor's equipment. And they show you a slasher, which is a tool, a cutting tool with a 4-foot long handle, in which you wield somewhat like an axe. And what it says, a slashing knife which is over a yard long, wielded by a strong man, will remove light brushwood very quickly. Where the wood is close and of a larger growth, the billhook is better. And what we are illustrating here is a billhook, which is a general purpose tool for that purpose. This particular one is a Yorkshire pattern billhook, which actually has 2 cutting edges and is of the strapped variety, making it extremely strong, less likely to break in use, and it has a hole through the handle, probably to carry it around your wrist, so you don't drop it and lose it in the undergrowth or whatever. It's sort of a precautionary measure against you losing it. So it's this sort of thing that will be used for that particular job. Very important, of course, because if you haven't got the line of sight from where you're looking from and to, you can't do the job. Then we have the miner's pick. We're coming on to the spades afterwards, but if they're prospecting, they have to get rid of overburden or whatever to get down to the ore, and so the many different sorts of miners' picks. There's certainly a Ballarat pattern which they used in Australia during the gold rush there, but this is a hammer-headed pick that you could use for two purposes: knocking props in if you were working underground, and digging out the used to dig out the ore or whatever. Moving on from that one, we have a Brazilian pattern adze or pick. You can choose whichever you want, which is a square pointed pick and a very heavy blade with a rib down the middle of it. And this again will be, you could use, it's a multi-purpose tool really. You can use it for rocks, you can use it for clearing bush, that sort of thing. You could even use it as a getting rid of bushes, trees, if you haven't got an axe handy. It's a general purpose tool. And this, with its friend over there, that is known as a picaroon, and it was made for Canada. And when they'd been cutting trees down and they were rafting them down the rivers, it was a tool used by the lumbermen in order to hold. They would knock it into a log in order to direct it where they wanted to go, probably into the flume where the sawmills are, in order to help. If you were working in those conditions, you want to be able to control logs but not be all that near them, because there'd be dangerous things. So that was the tool that they used in order to make the logs go where they were needed. This is a two-man cross-cut saw with the mark of Robert Sorby on it. Sorby certainly made saws in the 19th century, but I think over time the saw department, would possibly have been at Carver Street, but when they moved down to Wellington Street, probably the saw department didn't go with them. This is rather guesswork on my part, but I suspect that at that time they would get saws made in for them, and this will be one of those. It's in very good condition, of course. It's a 5-foot peg tooth, breasted, two-man cross-cut saw. Typical of people wanting to cut trees down, cut timber to length or whatever. And here we have two forms of shovels. This one is a very cheap spade. It's made out of stamped steel sheet. It's known as an open socket because in its manufacture this part isn't welded up at all. So it's quite cheap, but for most purposes it's admirable for its need. But if you in the date of this particular one will be about 1970, but typical of lots of things, called a round mouth shovel. So its terminology could well be a stamped round mouth open socket shovel with a T pattern, a crutch handle or a T-pattern handle. This other one here is known in the probably seen on many Western films of America, so this pattern certainly went out into America. They go out to shuffle plate without the handles on, and probably the handles were from trees grown in America, perhaps just rough tree trunks at one time, which just smoothed off. But this particular pattern in England, in the UK, was known as the West of England pattern. It was used either in Wales, Cornwall, as far east as Devon, and also in Ireland. And the patterns did vary slightly, but they all follow this with a long straight handle. But many of these went all over the world simply because they could slot the handles into them straight away, and it gave them a lot of leverage. And I think that this became the pattern known worldwide.